Yep. Paul Twomey, welcome to Business Spectator.
Thank you.
Let's just start off with something that's very much in the forefront of the IT and the communications sector, which is the NBN. In your mind, how transformational is this opportunity of the NBN, and what impact will it have on everyday Australians?
Oh, I think this is revolutionary. The concept that you're going to put into the hands of businesses and consumers, you know, the government's been talking about 100 megabit per second, but the minister's talked about potentially a gigabit per second, and there's certainly gigabit per second networks going on in Singapore and in Korea at the moment, Japan. What that essentially means is that I think is twofold. First of all, you're going to have whole new sets of applications available, starting off with all video, but I think with that sort of capacity we'll move pretty quickly to holographic and other forms of three-dimensional data projection type capacities. And the second one is that it allows the whole community to move online and have an experience of online that's just instantaneous. Their experience will be very similar to their television experience, and therefore in some respects will be an easier experience than the keyboard, HTML type experience.
Yeah.
What does it mean when you're reducing the transaction costs for that? Well, I think it means, first of all, in any marketing sense, that the ability to put compelling propositions in front of people. People talk about the emotional impact of television in terms of, it's marrying that with other forms of both the emotional impact of that sort of marketing with immediate do things. The second part, I think, is that it transforms the services sector. Any information-rich environment, architecture, legal work, particularly the medical, particularly education, particularly government services, particularly banking, these things are going to continue to get transformed. And they're going to mean that we're going to have significant, capacity to deliver this to everybody. Now, that's going to have certainly transformational effects at industry structure levels. I mean, we're going to see pressures on the small, if you like, the cottage industry type delivery systems will come under pressure because of this delivery. The other side of the coin is we also sit on, I think, a really important basis of linguistic and cultural skills in this country that traditionally our business leaders sort of ignored. Well, I think they've ignored. The capacity to marry that with our language and linguistic skills in our community should make us think much more about how do we turn our services sector into a major export sector. Because other parts of our region are moving so quickly to broadband and bigger broadband, if you like, we need to be thinking about this as an opportunity both to ensure that the software is developed in Australia, and that secondly, that we then sort of build it in a way that actually delivers exports. There's been talk about whether there should be a European Union model for the Asia Pacific. Online there already is. There are no tariffs, there are no barriers, right? So if people took the mindset that there wasn't a market of 22 million people, this was a market of 450 million or 2.2 billion that they were working towards when they developed the software, I think that would transform the way in which business would think of the opportunity in the NBN.
Now, are you confident that we will end up with an NBN, say, if there is a political change in Canberra?
Well, I can't talk for either political party. The interesting thing is I think there are certainly people who will need to invest into it. And I think whichever way, at least from an outsider's perspective, Telstra's response seems to be that there's a need for that sort of, there's a need for additional broadband. I think the international competitive pressures are going to continue for people to move this way. And the applications are going to be developed in such a way that if you don't move there, you have difficulty. The thing that does worry me is that if we don't take a view about this, about transforming the economy, if we don't think of this in terms of economic reform, and we don't think about it to a degree of the old industry policy stuff, which I'm pretty sceptical about, but if you don't take a view of that we need to develop these applications and software for Australians in Australia with an export orientation, we will find ourselves in 15 or 10 years' time running our country on American or somebody else's software. We'll be paying royalty fees out the door, not just for sort of operating systems, but for basically running the services sector of the economy. So I think there's a real wake-up call here. People are saying, okay, it's just about putting pipes in the ground, and the NBN leadership are focusing quite rightly on that. But that's just the mechanics. If we don't think through the implications of our services sector increasingly moving online and the need for us to capture the value of that in our own country, I do think there'd be concerns, or I would have concerns.
Now, from your time at ICANN, in your experience, look, the concept of privacy, I know Facebook is now suddenly facing some trouble with regards to privacy. Privacy is an issue that always comes up now when we deal with the internet. How hard is it to actually regulate around these things?
Well, I think it's very difficult. It's not just the network. It's not. People say it's the internet. It's actually a large bit because of the very cheap price of computation. So it's actually the ability to take databases and run them against each other really quickly. And there are business models that people offer. I think, I noticed, interestingly, I recently set up an email account with someone, and I was doing it in Italy. And I had the option to go Italy or the United States and Australia, and for various privacy reasons I made some decisions. And it was fascinating to see what different data was asked each time I said which country I was in. What data couldn't be asked for instance, certainly in Italy. So I do think there's something to be thought about in terms of, national regulations can have effect in the way in which the software is originally written. Once people make the decision to enter into a contract to deliver a service, then often they will walk into all sorts of privacy implications and will make the trade-off. People are going to say, I want to give up privacy in return for this return. But I think there's value in continuing to address privacy from a national cultural norm and say, what do you think is important? I mean, the Europeans clearly have a different standard than, say, the North Americans.
Now, cybersecurity is one of the issues that is being tackled at the Future Summit. How significant a threat is cybersecurity and the threat of hacking from a geopolitical point of view? And I think, with China, that's come into play.
Let's think about it from a business audience first and then come to geopolitical. I mean, the internet and the networks as a whole have produced big reductions in transaction costs and big reductions in barriers to entry for industry. We just talked about one, the media. And that has produced, in Australia alone between, in the sort of end of the 90s into the 2000s, I think 3/4 of our productivity improvement came through the implementation of ICT. So we're getting big productivity improvements in businesses and at the corporate levels. The very things that make it good for business have made it good for crims. So criminals have actually seen the opportunity to do this and have got more and more sophisticated in it. And we're seeing things like the mariposa, I always mispronounce the Spanish word for butterfly, botnet, for instance, that was closed down about 2 months ago now, coming out of Spain. 14 million machines infected. It had penetrated half of the Fortune 1000. It had penetrated 44 banks. And these people were just taking data as they could to make money. There's been recent cases of more sophisticated attacks. There's one recently I'm aware of in fraudulent attacks in the European carbon trading system. And the criminal groups are actually got access now to a complete mafia business system, very similar to the software companies. So first of all, directors and CEOs, very important, you need to understand this. It's part of the cost of doing business. It is a risk. They don't need to understand bits and bytes per se. They need to understand this in terms of economic risk. And that there's people only coming to realise that recently. It's a big issue for the insurance industry, and people aren't only beginning to understand it as well. But this is, what's happened is people have said, they've taken, the technology moves very fast, the ability to make money out of the technology moves pretty fast behind it. Appreciation of the risk that's come with that has been much slower. And that's a real challenge for CEOs. At the geopolitical level, there's no doubt that many governments use these networks for the same reason, both for espionage and for potentially cyber warfare, and countries have doctrines of cyber warfare. There is increasing discussion about potentially that maybe there should be some limitation about the cyber warfare plans.
I mean, how
false term. It's a resiliency plan. They've got to think about, how do I look at this in terms of building resiliency? Because you are going to remain vulnerable. So it's not just a question of how you try to resist that risk and reduce it. It's also what are you planning for to how to turn around if something happens to you.
Paul, we're running out of time, so we might just leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much.